I'm just going to read briefly from this. This is the final address that Salvador Allende gave to Chile. He was killed 45 years ago as part of a U.S.-backed coup which brought Augusto Pinochet to power. Pinochet killed thousands. He pioneered methods. I believe he pioneered the helicopter method of cutting people's stomachs out up in the air and then dropping them into the ocean so they sunk to the bottom. And of course was part of Operation Condor, where right-wing governments across Latin America coordinated with the support of Henry Kissinger and the U.S. intelligence apparatus to track down and murder leftists and liberals across Latin America. This is footage of the coup day, September 11th, 1973, brought to you by the CIA, the Nixon administration, and the Chilean military. Salvador Allende was very much a democratic socialist who was trying to bring his country forward in a social democratic manner. And I do think in some ways there are obviously some echoes with Lula da Silva and Brazil. This is from Salvador Allende. My friends, surely this will be the last opportunity for me to address you. The Air Force has bombed the towers of Radio Portales and the Radio Corporación. Apologies for my pronunciations. My words do not have bitterness but disappointment. May they be a moral punishment for those who have betrayed their oath. Soldiers of Chile, the titular Commander-in-Chief, Admiral Marzano, who has designated himself Commander of the Navy, and Mr. Mendoza, the despicable general who only yesterday pledged his fidelity and loyalty to the government, and who also employed himself Chief of Staff. Given these facts, the only thing left for me is to say to the workers, I am not going to resign. Placed in a historical transition, I will pay for loyalty to protect the people of my life. And I say to them that I'm certain that the seed which we have planted in the good conscience and thousands of Chileans will not be shriveled forever. They have strength and they will be able to dominate us, but social progress can be arrested neither by crime nor force. History is ours, and people make history. Workers of my country, I want to thank you for my loyalty that you have always had and the confidence that you deposited in a man who is not only an interpreter of the great yearnings of justice, who gave his word that he would respect the Constitution and law and did just that. At this definitive moment, the last moment when I can address you, I wish to take the advantage of the lesson. Foreign capital, imperialism, together with reaction, created a climate in which the armed forces broke their tradition and the tradition taught by General Schneider and reaffirmed by Commander Arrieta. Victims of the same social sector will today be in their homes hoping with foreign assistance to retake power, to continue defending their profits and their privileges. And it goes on. So we note that history and how it still plays out today.
I think we also need to take some lessons from some of the mistakes that he made, though. Like, Allende was such, like, just a great guy, great socialist, but there were some mistakes along the way that we can see in hindsight. Like, just the idea that the right wing will ever respect any kind of norms of democratic government is a falsehood. Like, he appeased Pinochet by appointing him head of the army and eventually chief of staff. And that didn't work. Obviously, it went very badly. When there was coup attempt after coup attempt before the one that finally worked. And he was still saying, we have to respect the democratic process. And the people were begging the government to arm them. And they put down some of these armed rebellions and said,
I just think it's,
wait.
I think,
and it was a sincere miscalculation. And
I think it's
he died for it.
really important to just be mindful of, like, injecting ourselves into those circumstances and those calculations, right? Like, I mean, I think there's truth to what you're saying, and Castro certainly said that to him. And I also think that, like, first of all, I'm not going to judge the man's ideological commitment, which I think was sincere to democratic process. And then also,
I think it was sincere
definitely
too.
know if you talk to, to Chileans who've lived it, it's like, I guess I'm just, I don't know. I'm just very hesitant to, like, retroactively read us in our comfort and circumstances of, like, what people should have done. And even if that was even in that situation in any way really realistically possible. if you armed a handful of workers, that would not be
people
enough.
were already armed and the government took their arms away.
It would not have been enough to have any reversal of a military coup. Like when they made that decision and they made that move, there was nothing that was going to stop it. And he might have been wrong in trying to appease them, but that might have been his only play.
Well,
so
I think we can learn some things without being shitty to the legacy and the memory of Allende. And like, I don't pretend to be an expert on this. I went to a talk that I thought was very good at the Socialism Conference. They obviously had a point of view as well, but yeah, we can respect it and we can learn from it and carry it into the future. And sometimes you do have a better perspective from the future, and that's not like, it's not their fault that they didn't have it at the time. It's very, very hard to know what to do. And like, no, there's no proof that it would have worked to have an armed struggle against
and in
the coup.
most of these places,
it might have.
And in most of these places, it didn't. Like, it worked in Cuba in super specific circumstances, and it kind of worked in Nicaragua. It did work partially in Nicaragua. And then, like, in most other places, particularly ones analogous to Chile, like in Brazil, the military dictatorship was not brought down by guerrillas at all. It was actually brought down by independent labor movement and people like Lula. And eventually, when the military dictatorship was brought down in Chile, it was actually, it was brought down by really like a totally civic mass protest movement with like clever ad campaigns. So that is how it ended up playing out. I hear what you're saying. I agree with it, but I also just, I don't know, I get really hesitant to read stuff like that retroactively when obviously we weren't there. I wish actually that Allende shot Pinochet. That would be cool. But I don't think it was I don't think Pinochet came. It would have been awesome if Pinochet came in personally and Allende was like, "You thought I was a real pussy, didn't you?" And he just like popped him in the face. Well, that would have been a great moment.
It would have. Like the one of the lessons that I took from it anyway was that when you are trying to transition from capitalism to socialism, as Allende was, the electoral process can be many steps on the way. It can be very important, but it's never going to be the final step when you have a heavily armed and violent resistance on the part of the international ruling class.
I think of Lincoln suspending habeas corpus,
right?
And I think you do eventually you come to those moments where it's like, we got to do something like this, and the thing to do is not pretend like you're not breaking that value, whether it's democracy or habeas corpus or what have you. The important thing is to reify it while you break it. Right. And it's sort of like that guy who called about like, well, what if you needed torture? You had a 24 like situation. Well, guess what? If I'm the torturer there, and I know that I can get this information that's going to save us. Obviously, we all know this scenario is dumb, but let's just grant it for a second. Then I'm going to torture him, and then I'm going to serve my time because torturing is against the law, and you can't do it.
Well, what's funny,
though? I'll know
though,
that I'll have saved people anyway, so guess what? That's a price I'll be willing to pay as an actual hero. Right.
I mean, I think the one to look at maybe, again, it's a much less developed country with different types of stratification, but like, arguably, Michael Manley kind of tried to straddle that line in Jamaica, right? Like, there were always elections in Jamaica, and his agenda wasn't even particularly radical. And partially this already existed before Manley and before Seaga in the 70s, but like, you had armed gangs affiliated with both political parties, and the CIA trained and coordinated, no doubt, with the right-leaning ones, and the Cubans came in and trained and armed up Manley's ones, and they lost because when Kissinger and the United States put their attention on destabilizing the Jamaican economy, it happened, even though they had their own like gun units and their own, and also that led to them committing a lot of their own atrocities, like for sure, right? Because they also had to play the game of like burning down each other's constituencies to create room for their voting blocks. And, that's how it played out until like the early 90s. And then the right just won and dominated electorally. Well, and
I think that's something to be said for focusing on revolution here in the heart of empire, whether it's a political revolution or what have you, because there are third worldists out there who think that, the only revolution that's even valid that can happen is in developing countries right now, and that everybody, all workers in the U.S. are like the ruling class of the world. And the conclusion there is basically we can't really do anything. But like when revolutions happen in the developing world, they are subject to U.S. foreign policy. So that's a reason why we need to stay here and we need to fight.
And even in a case like in Jamaica, where, I mean, Manley did have relations with Cuba and he was a supporter of like liberation struggles in Africa. But again, he was super moderate. A big precipitating event for the U.S. targeting Jamaica that's fairly well reported is Kissinger coming to Jamaica on vacation and wanting to meet with Manley, and Manley being like, you have to come to my residence. I'm not going to go see you. And like that type of shit. Literally. Oh, this is very disrespectful. We're going to...
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah, of course.
About democracy? Like, in terms of democratic socialism, which we talk about a lot on the show,
I think that worked, that one. Yes, Democrat. Yes.
A lot of people talk about democratic socialism, and we can't confuse the bourgeois democracy that we currently have in America with democracy as a whole, small d democracy, right? Because a revolution, even though it doesn't go through the route of bourgeois electoralism, can be democratic if everybody agrees on it, right? If the majority agrees on it. So I just want to expand the concept a little bit. And you know, most people probably know that already, but just putting it out there.
Even in liberal terms, democracy is much broader than just voting. There's a lot more at stake in a healthy democracy.